Captain Elena Vasquez lay motionless inside the blind she had built from shattered stone and splintered wood at the base of the ruined minaret. Rubble surrounded her like a second skin, concealing every line of her body from distant eyes. The early light along Highway 1 stretched across the Afghan plain in pale ribbons of gold. Soft at first, but already heavy with the promise of heat, dust drifted in slow spirals from the road. Stirred by the faint morning wind and the low growl of an armored convoy that had not yet reached the danger zone, her world shrank to the circle of glass in her scope and the measured cadence of her breath. The Taliban sniper had been patient too. Intelligence said he had killed 6 soldiers in the last 2 weeks, each with a single shot placed with surgical precision. His confidence had made him bold, but boldness also made him predictable. Elena knew he would strike at this convoy, and she had waited through the long night, steady as the rubble itself, for the moment when his discipline finally broke. When the flash came from the 4th-floor window across 300 yards of open air, she was already adjusting. His bullet passed so close, she smelled the burn of cordite as it sliced the space beside her cheek. The stone near her head spat dust against her skin. She did not flinch. She pressed her cheek firmer into the stock, her eye never leaving the glass. Wind drift tugged at the crosshairs. She accounted for it as naturally as she accounted for her own heartbeat. Her folded notebook lay beneath her arm, edges worn from years of field notes. Inside were tiny calculations, angles of wind sheer across valleys, the effects of thin mountain air on a bullet's path, the adjustments needed when heat shimmer bent light like water. She had memorized them all. But she carried the notebook anyway. It anchored her in the ritual. Through her scope, she saw him cycle his bolt, steady and practiced. The enemy's position was almost flawless, his camouflage laid with a professional hand. She noted the symmetry of the rubble stacked to shield his outline, the precision with which he had chosen a window that overlooked both the convoy's route and 2 escape alleys. It felt too exact, too refined. This was no village fighter with a captured rifle. Whoever he was, he had studied his craft well. Elena exhaled halfway and let the rest ease out slowly. Her Barrett M82A1 was braced against sandbags she had dragged into place the night before. The weapon was more than a rifle to her. It was a living instrument. Thunder, harnessed in steel. And when it spoke, it ended lives with certainty. She drew the trigger into the line of her finger and felt the clean break. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a roar that shattered the dawn's stillness. Across the road, the enemy sniper's head snapped back in a sudden red mist, his rifle clattering down the stairwell in useless fragments of steel. For a moment there was silence, as if even the valley held its breath. Then the convoy below rolled forward again, unaware of how close death had come. Dust plumes began to lift from their wheels, spreading like a veil that would have obscured her shot if she had waited even 5 more minutes. Timing was everything. The difference between a legend and a casualty often came down to the patience to wait and the precision to act at the exact second required. She eased her finger from the trigger and worked the bolt, chambering another round without hesitation. Her eyes scanned the compound for movement, any sign of a second rifle, any flicker that suggested the fight was not finished. Nothing stirred, except a curtain fluttering faintly in the dry wind. Yet, even in victory, unease lingered. The man she had killed had been too skilled, his hide too carefully prepared. His first shot had come within inches of her life, so close that the air itself had seemed to recoil against her cheek. It was not luck. It was deliberate, the work of someone who had either known where she would be or had studied snipers like her long enough to predict it. The dust haze thickened as the convoy advanced, blurring outlines into shifting ghosts. Elena remained still inside her blind, her rifle steady, her pulse even. Around her the rubble pressed close, fragments of stone and mortar hiding her from the world. Legends, she knew, were written in moments like this, not in triumphal shouts or medals pinned in ceremonies, but in the silence after the shot, when lives were saved because she had waited long enough and calculated true, Still, fragility lived in that silence too. For the first time, she wondered if her enemies were learning from her as much as she was learning from them. The air inside the debrief room at Forward Operating Base Lightning was sharp, with recycled chill, a jarring contrast to the furnace heat outside. Captain Elena Vasquez sat across from Colonel Marcus Hayes, her uniform still streaked with Afghan dust, her Barrett case propped silently against the wall at her side. The smell of cordite clung faintly to her sleeves, a reminder that less than an hour earlier she had been prone in rubble with a bullet slicing past her cheek. She did not fidget. She kept her posture rigid, waiting while Hayes studied the tactical map projected on the wall. The map bore red pins clustered across valleys and ridges, each one marking an engagement where Elena had taken a shot. The spread formed a pattern, though only she and Hayes seemed to notice. Hayes leaned forward, the faint light of the screen reflecting off the deep lines around his eyes. He had seen more campaigns than she cared to count, but his voice carried a weight she did not often hear. He asked her to walk him through her approach to the position. She did so calmly, describing her movement through false hides, the 4 hours it took to settle into the blind, the patient wait until the enemy showed himself. She spoke of the shot that had nearly ended her life. That round passed too close. Hayes said at last, his tone flat. 2 inches off your skull isn't a near miss. That's intent. Elena rested a gloved hand on her folded notebook, the one she always carried, filled with years of careful adjustments and calculations. Her voice was measured. She explained that the enemy sniper had fired like someone who already knew her exact location. The shot was not probing. It was precision, the kind that came from hours of reconnaissance or knowledge of her habits. She did not like the implication. Hayes tapped the map with a blunt finger. We recovered prints from the body, ran them through the database. His name was Dmitry Vulov, former Russian Spetsnaz, decorated, fought in Chechnya, a mercenary now. He paused, letting the words sink in. You weren't facing some insurgent with a lucky angle. You were facing someone trained the way you were trained. The silence that followed felt heavier than the air conditioning. Elena's gaze shifted briefly to the Barrett case. She thought of how Vulov's first shot had carried the same weight of certainty as her own. She asked the question she already knew had to be asked. Was he working alone? Hayes shook his head. He opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs of men with sharp eyes and military postures. Intel suggests Vulov was part of a larger cell, foreign professionals, paid well. They're not just killing coalition soldiers at random. They're hunting our snipers. Hunting you. Elena kept her expression still, though she felt a coil tighten inside her chest. She returned her attention to the notebook under her hand. She had always trusted in preparation, in her ability to calculate every angle, to anticipate every mistake her opponents might make. But what if her predictability was now a liability? What if each meticulous correction was being charted against her? She spoke quietly, considering possibilities aloud. Spotters tracking her movement into hides. Thermal imaging catching her heat signature through rock. Or worse, analysts building a pattern out of her engagements, noting the positions she favored, the way she chose her blinds, the moments she pulled the trigger. She admitted that Vulov's tactics mirrored her own, as though he had studied the same manuals. Hayes frowned, his eyes narrowing on the red pins scattered across the tactical map. The spread of her victories looked uncomfortably like a trail. One, an enemy could follow if they had the patience, to see patterns where others saw only isolated engagements. He told her that her reputation, the legend of the ghost, cut both ways. It gave coalition forces confidence and enemy fighters dread. But it also made her the most studied sniper in the theater. Her folded notebook seemed to grow heavier under her hand. She had always believed her calculations set her apart, that her precision was untouchable. Now she wondered if her exactness made her vulnerable. She thought of the dust haze she used as concealment, of how she relied on patience as a weapon. What if someone else had learned to wait for her instead? Hayes leaned back, his voice low. You've built your edge on being meticulous, never missing, never rushing. But the enemy isn't blind anymore. They're creating a profile, studying the ghost, the same way you've studied them. Elena kept her gaze steady, though unease threaded through her calm. The Barrett case leaned against the wall, silent testimony to her legend. The red pins on the map glowed like warnings, each one a lesson she had taught that someone else might now be learning. She nodded once, acknowledging the truth in Hayes's warning. Legends could inspire, but they also invited the most dangerous kind of attention. The Korengal Valley was carved like a scar into the Afghan mountains, steep ridges on either side, and switchback trails etched into stone that seemed to brood in silence. Captain Elena Vasquez had studied the topographical charts for weeks, but paper could never prepare for the oppressive weight of terrain that swallowed sound and distorted distance. She moved with Staff Sergeant Mike Chun at her side, both of them taking deliberate steps through the shadows of pines that clung stubbornly to the slopes. Their target was not a single fighter, but a network of enemy marksmen who had made the valley lethal for convoys. Command had called it a sniper's paradise. Elena called it an invitation. They had entered at night, carrying minimal gear and silent radios, their breath muffled against damp cloth. Chun carried the rangefinder and kept his head on a swivel. Elena's Barrett rifle rested in her hands like an executioner's gavel. Heavy and absolute, her laminated dope cards were tucked into her vest pocket, edges smudged from constant use. The wind meter swung lightly from its strap, a reminder that invisible currents could shift fate as easily as a human decision. Every detail mattered here, and she treated each one as if lives already depended on it. Their first target revealed himself at dawn. From a ridge overlooking the road, a figure in loose robes set up a Dragunov SVD. With the care of someone who thought he owned the space, Elena and Chun had been in position for 40 minutes. Watching him arrange his supports, camouflage, netting, an escape line, she let him believe in his control. She knew from the angle of his barrel that his first shot would be aimed at the windshield of a convoy lead vehicle, disabling it for follow-on strikes. She let him lean forward, peer through the scope, and prepare for the false comfort of dominance. Then she pressed the trigger. The Barrett cracked like thunder through the valley, and his head dropped against the stones, lifeless, before his body even toppled. The kill was not the end. It was the beginning of the lesson. Elena and Chun shifted hides during the night, moving slow and deliberate. Each new dawn brought another sniper who believed the valley still belonged to him. The second came 3 days later, positioned in a narrow draw with excellent visibility on the road below. Elena allowed him to fire first. His shot shattered a truck's side mirror, meant to slow the convoy. As he cycled the bolt, confident and patient, her round arrived. It struck him square, the sound echoing through the rock like the punctuation of inevitability. The convoy pressed on, unaware that death had been waiting for them in the high ground. By the time the third sniper revealed himself, paranoia had begun to take root in the valley. The remaining shooters had started shifting positions more often, testing decoys, and firing single rounds before vanishing. Elena anticipated the change. She sketched firing lanes in her notebook by hand, marking angles and likely fields of fire. At a helicopter landing zone, one of the Taliban marksmen tried to exploit the chaos of rotor wash. Elena had already calculated where he had to be. When he fired, she was waiting, and her bullet traveled nearly 1,000 meters through the thin air, catching him before he could adjust. The Barrett's recoil pressed deep into her shoulder, but her calm never shifted. The final sniper was the most cautious. He avoided patterns, moved constantly, and seemed to sense that someone was dismantling his network piece by piece. Elena understood that his pride would betray him. She coordinated with ground forces to stage a convoy that looked vulnerable, rolling slowly with fewer escorts. The trap was bait. He could not resist. He took his position with all the skill of a professional legate, believing the convoy was his. He fired one shot. The moment his muzzle flashed, Elena's scope was already centered. Her round ended him before he could chamber another. The valley grew quiet. By the end of 6 days, 4 enemy marksmen were dead. Coalition convoys moved through the Korengal with renewed confidence. In intercepted chatter, fighters whispered about an unseen ghost who turned their own pride against them. Elena and Chun left the valley as silently as they had entered, her laminated cards tucked neatly away, the barret cleaned and wrapped, the wind meter secured. She carried no boast, only the certainty that patience and precision had done what brute force never could. Suspense was not born in the trigger pull, but in the long wait, the silent hours where she let her enemies prove themselves careless. The transport touched down at Bagram with a jarring slam that rattled gear and pressed Elena Vasquez back into her seat. The cargo ramp lowered into a haze of dust, kicked up by rotor wash and armored convoys grinding across the tarmac. The air was thick with heat, and the metallic tang of jet fuel. Bagram was a hub where wars converged. And for Elena, it marked the threshold of something different. She was not here as a lone counter-sniper anymore. She was stepping into Task Force Phoenix, a joint NATO unit assembled to face a threat that looked disturbingly like her own reflection. Colonel Sarah Martinez greeted the arriving team with a clipped nod. She was sharp-eyed, her posture radiating command authority, and she wasted no words. Elena joined the others as they moved toward the compound. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison, the Marine Scout sniper, walked with the weary stride of someone who had seen 2 decades of fights. Staff Sergeant Ashley Chun carried herself with quiet vigilance, her background in Special Forces written in every controlled motion. Technical Sergeant Marcus Williams, Air Force Special Tactics, hauled a pack full of electronics and comms gear with a confidence that came from mastering the unseen half of war. Elena studied them in silence, cataloging their strengths, already gauging how trust would have to be earned here. The briefing room was cold, lit by the pale glow of screens that covered one entire wall. Satellite overlays layered with grids, intercepted chatter, and casualty markers glowed against the darkness. Martinez gestured for them to sit while Major Kim, the intelligence officer, began the presentation. A dossier appeared first, then another, each face staring out with the hard eyes of men shaped by professional armies. Kim's words were steady. This was not an insurgent problem anymore. The Precision Strike Collective, a mercenary group with state funding, had deployed a cadre of veteran snipers into the region. Russian, Serbian, Iraqi, each with combat records that rivaled any Western operator. Coalition forces had already recorded a 92% hit rate from their attacks. Many at distances beyond 400 meters, convoys were being stopped cold. Patrols bled of momentum, and morale, shaken by the precision of unseen hunters. Morrison gave a low whistle, shaking his head. Chun leaned forward, brows drawn tight as she scanned the dossiers. Williams muttered that these numbers looked like Special Forces training, not freelancers. Elena kept her face still. Though her mind ran fast, these men were not shadows on a map. They were peers, professionals who could read terrain and calculate wind as fluently as she could, and they were being paid to kill people like her. Martinez turned to Elena at last. "You've faced them before. Captain, what's your assessment?" Elena rested one hand lightly on her notebook, its pages filled with the math of past duels. "They'll expect us to hunt them as individuals," she said. "We should do the opposite. Let them hunt me. Make me the lure. Build their pride into a trap." The room went still. Morrison's laugh was short, more disbelief than humor. "You're volunteering to walk into their rifles," Chun shook her head, muttering that the risk was suicidal. Williams only raised his eyebrows, as if already weighing how his systems could cover such a move. Martinez did not dismiss the idea. She studied Elena with the cool gaze of a commander who knew that war was as much psychology as bullets. "High risk," she said slowly, "but it might be the only way to break them." On the screen, the faces of the Precision Strike Collective stared back, unmoved, like ghosts waiting for recognition. The red casualty markers spread across the map like blood drops. For the first time in her career, Elena felt the balance shift. She was no longer the hunter sweeping shadows from valleys. The hunters had arrived, organized and armed with knowledge, meant to unravel her legend. Suspense thickened in the cold room, and she understood with perfect clarity. To survive, she would have to turn her own reputation into bait and prove, once again, that patience and precision could outmatch, even equals. The mountains east of Kabul stretched like broken teeth against the sky, their ridgelines harsh and unforgiving. Captain Elena Vasquez lay in a blind, carved into a scatter of shale, her body hidden beneath a veil of fabric, patterned to match the slope. 3 hours had passed since she settled into position. 3 hours of stillness. Her breath slowed to a rhythm just above sleep, of waiting for the duel to reveal itself. The convoy route lay below her, a strip of pale dirt winding between rock outcrops where trucks would be forced to slow. It was a natural choke point, the kind of terrain a professional would never ignore. Victor Klov had chosen his ground well. Former Spetsnaz. With 2 decades of experience, he had built a hide that would have fooled anyone but another predator. Through her scope, Elena caught faint irregularities in the stone line, a shadow angled against the grain. The subtle glint of glass buried deep behind mesh. His camouflage was meticulous, his position fortified with multiple firing ports. He had marked escape routes, too. Morrison's voice came softly over her earpiece, reporting that Klov could retreat southeast through a cut in the ridge or vanish west down a goat path. Every line of his preparation spoke of someone who had survived long by leaving himself options. Williams monitored comms from his concealed perch farther back, feeding Elena updates on convoy timing. The trucks were still 15 minutes out, climbing toward the pass with the grinding inevitability of steel. Elena kept her rifle steady. The Barrett balanced on its bipod like a gavel waiting to strike. Her laminated card sat beneath her hand. Figures etched in neat lines. Wind 2 knots from the west. Angle 6 degrees downward. Range 600 meters. The math was clean. But math was only half of the battle. Psychology was the rest. Through the haze of late-morning heat, she watched Klov's Dragunov shift fractionally as he tested angles on the road below. He was patient, as she was. His breathing never betrayed urgency. The silence between them stretched so taut, it felt like it might snap. Elena knew the convoy would soon kick up dust clouds that blurred vision, leaving only minutes for a clear shot. She also knew Klov's pride would not let him wait much longer. A man like him wanted to prove mastery, to take the convoy under his control. At one point, his scope swept across her sector. She froze, every muscle locked in silence, as if her heartbeat might give her away. For a suspended second, Predator looked at Predator. It was not sight, but instinct, each sensing the other's presence across the air. Then his glass shifted on, satisfied, or at least unconvinced enough to dismiss her hollow of stone as dead ground. She let the tension bleed from her lungs slowly, never once moving her hands from the rifle. The trucks appeared, their outlines shimmering in heat haze, engines echoing faintly through the valley. Dust rose behind them in pale curtains. Klov's rifle followed their line, his barrel settling with the assurance of someone who had rehearsed this shot a dozen times in his mind. Elena adjusted a hair's breadth, crosshairs aligned not on the convoy, but on the man waiting to fire upon it. She counted his breaths through the rhythm of his shoulder. She felt the moment when he stopped scanning and began aiming. Her finger tightened. Smooth and deliberate, the Barrett thundered. At the same instant, Klov shifted his Dragunov, as if some instinct whispered warning, but it was already too late. The .50 caliber round crossed the distance in a blink and struck his head with decisive finality. The Dragunov clattered against stone, silent testimony to wars fought long before this one. Morrison's voice confirmed the kill, but Elena already knew. Through her scope, she saw only stillness where once had been another predator. Below, the convoy rolled on. Unaware of how close they had come to being prey, suspense ebbed with the echo of her shot, leaving behind the sharp awareness that Clove had been her equal in many ways. He had camouflage, patience, and experience. Yet he revealed himself in the inevitability of his ambition. She had anticipated him, and that was enough. The message came through on an encrypted channel, stripped of embellishment and heavy with intent. To the American sniper known as the Ghost, it read, "You have interfered for the last time. We challenge you to single combat." Coordinates followed, along with a time 3 days ahead. The signature was simple, the Reaper. Intelligence confirmed the name matched Alexei Petrov, a former Russian naval infantry sniper whose record of confirmed kills rivaled the best in Europe. It was not a bluff. It was bait. Elena Vasquez read the words 3 times, her face unreadable, then closed the folder and told Colonel Martinez she would accept. Preparation consumed the hours that followed. Surveillance mapped the valley where the duel would take place. A sniper's arena with ridges that commanded sightlines for a kilometer in every direction. Petrov had built multiple hides, each disguised as naturally as stone and brush. He wanted a classic engagement, a contest at distance, where skill with glass and barrel decided who lived. Elena studied the maps, then her folded notebook of calculations, and quietly formed a different plan. She would not fight him at 1,000 meters. She would come through the ravines and close the gap to 200, where surprise and adaptability outweighed even the best preparation. On the night before the challenge, she crept alone through the dead ground, her boots finding silent purchase on loose rock. The ravines bent and narrowed, their walls high enough to shield her from Petrov's overwatch. The climb was deliberate, every step rehearsed in her mind. When dawn came, she lay prone behind a low rise, just 200 meters from his primary position. Through her scope she saw him steady hands, calm posture. The Dragunov resting like an extension of his body, his eyes swept the ridgelines, searching for her where he assumed she would be. He never considered that she would come so close. She exhaled, drew the trigger, and the Barrett roared. At the last fraction of a second, Petrov shifted, rolling to the side as though instinct had warned him. The bullet shattered stone where his head had been, spraying dust across his position. He responded without hesitation, sliding behind cover and vanishing into an escape channel he had prepared in advance. Elena worked the bolt, chambered again, but he was gone. The duel had shifted. Now she was exposed, her position compromised, and the hunter was hunting back. For minutes that stretched like hours, the valley was silent except for the whisper of wind. Then his first countershot came, a round that carved sparks from the rock inches above her shoulder. He had moved fast, establishing a new angle that almost pinned her in place. She flattened against the slope, then began to crawl laterally, using the folds of terrain to disappear. Petrov was patient, disciplined. His scope cut the valley in measured sweeps, counter-surveillance at its finest. Each time she thought she had a window, another round snapped the air close enough to taste grit in her teeth. Adaptation became her weapon. She abandoned the rise, slid into another ravine, and looped toward his flank. It was slow work, the kind of movement that stretched muscles to burning. But it was silent. She circled until she reached a vantage where his focus on her old position left him vulnerable. Through her scope she caught him, resetting his Dragunov, his concentration total, his calm, absolute. She steadied her breathing, ignored the thrum in her arms, and pressed the trigger. This time the bullet found its mark. Petrov's head jerked back, the rifle tumbling from his grasp as his body sagged behind the stones. Elena held position for long seconds, waiting for deception. When none came, she advanced cautiously, rifle ready. His hide was a craftsman's work, stocked with water, ammunition, and escape routes that told the story of years of survival. She found communications gear and handwritten notes, coded transmissions that mapped not just his own movements, but those of a network. The Precision Strike Collective was not a loose band of mercenaries. It was organized, resourced, and deliberate. She closed the notebook she had taken from his pack and felt the truth settle heavy in her chest. Killing Petrov had been necessary, but the duel was never just one against one. It was proof that her legend was now both weapon and target. For weeks after Petrov's death, Task Force Phoenix tracked the movements of Hassan al-Baghdadi through the northern mountains. Unlike the Spetsnaz veterans who had relied on entrenched precision, Baghdadi shifted constantly, striking convoys with a single round before vanishing into the high ground. Intercepted chatter confirmed his intent. He was trying to disrupt supply routes without exposing himself to the kind of duel that had ended his colleagues. Elena Vasquez studied every report, every fragment of intercepted transmission, and began to sketch his patterns in her notebook. The marks formed a sequence of ambushes moving steadily toward the bridge that carried Highway 7 across a narrow gorge. It was the most obvious choke point and the one place he could not resist. The team moved into position before dawn. Morrison took the far ridge, covering escape paths. Williams established surveillance from a concealed site with antennas hidden in rock crevices. Elena claimed the low-rise overlooking the bridge itself. The Barrett steady against packed sandbags. Her notes, Leipzig here. Predictions inked into the margins that matched the terrain perfectly. She had written that Baghdadi would fire on the lead vehicle as it slowed for the incline. All that remained was the waiting. The convoy rumbled through the valley floor, 6 armored trucks throwing dust into the pale morning light. Engines growled, wheels rattled across stone, and the sound echoed against the gorge walls. Elena kept her cheek against the stock, eyes locked to her scope. For long minutes, nothing stirred. Then a muzzle flash lit the rocks to the northeast. A single round cracked through the air. Striking sparks from the side of the lead vehicle, the truck lurched but kept moving. Baghdadi had revealed himself. Elena's crosshairs were already on his position. She saw him working the bolt of his rifle, his profile outlined against the rock. She let her breath slide out, steady and calm, then pressed the trigger. The Barrett roared, and the bullet crossed 600 meters of cold air. His head snapped back, his rifle clattering across the slope. The gorge fell silent except for the convoy, which pressed on unaware that death had been waiting in the cliffs. Morrison confirmed the kill, his voice low with respect. Williams reported no secondary movement and intercepted comms collapsing into confusion. Within hours, analysts reported that PSC operatives were requesting extraction. The death of Baghdadi so soon after Petrov and Clove had broken their confidence. The winter offensive, once planned as a decisive disruption, was abandoned. Intercepts carried a phrase repeated across channels: "The ghost is watching." Elena cleaned her rifle in silence that night, the bridge still vivid in her mind. Victory carried no triumph, only recognition. The Barrett had spoken once more, but the weapon that truly dismantled the enemy was fear. The legend of the ghost had become stronger than any bullet. The last days at Forward Operating Base, lightning passed in a blur of quiet ritual. Captain Elena Vasquez packed her gear without ceremony, folding uniform still marked by Afghan dust into the rigid corners of her rucksack. The Barrett case leaned against the wall, cleaned and sealed, its weight familiar yet distant, as though she were setting aside not just a weapon but a piece of herself. The room around her was stripped bare. Maps that once bristled with red pins had been cleared from the wall, the surfaces pale where sunlight had not touched. Only faint outlines remained, reminders of where battles had been planned and where lives had been saved. The final briefing at Task Force Phoenix was understated. Intelligence officers reported that sniper incidents across the theater had dropped by more than 3/4. The Precision Strike Collective, once feared for its precision and organization, had fractured beyond repair. Intercepted messages spoke of demoralized fighters asking for reassignment, some abandoning their positions altogether. Yet her name still surfaced in the fragments. The Ghost. They called her a whisper moving through valleys and villages, carried like smoke by men who had never seen her, but had heard what became of those who tried. Elena listened without reaction, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Colonel Martinez thanked her for her service. The words clipped and professional. Morrison nodded once. A soldier's acknowledgement, without need for embellishment. Ashley Chun offered a brief handshake. Eyes steady. No smile. Williams gave a final report about comms surveillance. Then closed his laptop with finality. The meeting dispersed quickly. As though all of them knew that silence was the only fitting conclusion, that night, Elena opened her journal, the leather cover worn smooth by years of field use. She wrote slowly, the words deliberate. 43 sniper duels. 0 defeats. But the numbers, she admitted to herself, told only a fraction of the truth. Each shot had carried weight beyond the target, shaping the behavior of enemies and allies alike. Legends, she wrote, were not built from glory or spectacle. They were constructed in patience, in the silence of waiting for hours without moving, in the discipline to fire only when the moment demanded. Precision was not just calculation, it was restraint, and restraint carried its own cost. She closed the journal gently, placing it beside the Barrett case as though the two belonged together. When the transport plane lifted from Bagram the following morning, Elena sat near the window. The engines rumbled, drowning out every other sound as the Afghan mountains slipped away beneath a haze of dust and cloud. She watched the ridgelines fade, knowing her story would remain carved there in whispers and half-remembered warnings. She felt no triumph, only the calm recognition that suspense never truly ended. Somewhere, another hunter was preparing, another duel waiting to be written. She carried with her the silence of the mountains, the weight of the rifle, and the legend of the ghost.